fifth of 5 Lifetime Deacon interviews. And we have the opportunity tonight to hear from Fred Kelly, who drew the shortest or the longest stick. I don't know how that works to go last. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. But just a reminder that a lifetime deacon is someone who has served at least 3 tenures, at least 3 stints as a deacon, and has been voted on for this recognition by our diaconate. So it's an honor to not only be able to serve at least three times in this role, but also to be recognized by our servants in our church, our diaconate. And so tonight we have Fred Kelly. Fred, would you mind just bringing us up to speed or tell us about maybe your upbringing and growing up?
I grew up in the southeast corner of Alabama, down in what is referred to as the Wiregrass. I had the auspicious honor of having lived in 2 counties where Jim pastored before he came to Shades Crest. I grew up, I was born, first 7 years I lived in a little town called, or 9 years, a little town called Newville, Alabama. It's probably
a booming
A
metropolis.
fourth the size of Gewin.
Yeah, that's right.
And then my father changed pastorates, and we moved to a town of about 350 people, Webb, Alabama, and I lived there for 9 years. And that's in Houston County near Dothan. And of course, my father being a pastor meant that, like others, I think Ron in his talk in this same situation here mentioned the fact his grandfather, with whom he lived, was a pastor, and so, yeah, I was well churched.
Yes.
In fact, for those first 7 years, my dad was the pastor of 2 halftime churches, which meant one met first and third Sunday, one met second and fourth, and 1 quarter-time church.
Goodness.
So
that math doesn't add up.
What that meant in the summer was 3 revivals, 3 vacation Bible schools often. So I had plenty of exposure to church activity.
So you probably came early and stayed late at the church.
Yeah, well,
but talk to us about maybe your spiritual journey. So you obviously were in the church. Your father's a pastor serving multiple churches. But tell us about your spiritual journey.
Well, fairly early on, I was aware of the fact that I needed to make that decision. I guess I was around 8 years old or so. I remember my mother talking to me. I mentioned something about that, and I guess she saw that as the opportunity to speak to me particularly about that. And that next Sunday, I think it was, when I made my profession of faith at the Newville Baptist Church, as a matter of fact.
And how old were you then?
I think I was 8, perhaps.
8.
Yeah, I think, looking back on that, yeah.
And so you grow up in a Christian home. You come to faith at 8. Talk to us maybe about your early adult life, maybe going to college, and maybe even how you met Denise.
I was a third church in which my dad pastored while I was still at home was in Coffee County, Alabama, near Elba, where Jim was at the time. And I did my last 2 years of high school at Enterprise High School. And I kind of was vacillating about making my college choice. I have an uncle who's only 6 years older than me who was an important influence in my life, and he'd gone to the University of Alabama. The only college football game I'd ever been to at that point was a game when I went up when he was a student there. A friend there in the little town we lived in took my brother and me up to a game there and wound up going to Tuscaloosa for school. And after that first year, I'd gotten involved in Baptist Campus Ministries, or the Baptist Student Union, as we called it then. And I had a job on campus in the registrar's office, and if I stayed in summer school, I could keep my job on campus. So I did that. And I was elected summer president for the BSU program. And one of the things we did at that time was to have all of the freshmen who were going to be entering when they came up for orientation, they would make a visit to their denomination's student center on campus. And Denise, being a year behind me in school, had come up for orientation. And so I met a lot of freshmen that year. But I met one in particular that I remembered. And being in the registrar's office, I remembered her name, and so I could go check up on her information that she had sent for registration. And so I collected some data even before she got up there.
Social Security number, blood type, those type of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
it was just your Christian ministry that you were doing at that point, right?
And just, my concern for...
Yes, I understand. For the lost and dying in the world, yeah.
And I ran into her a couple of times on campus. I remembered her. I'm not sure she remembered me or not. And then she happened to be rooming, though, with a couple in the same dorm with a couple of friends, good friends that I had who were active at the BSU. And so I asked them if they thought she might go with me to the Christmas banquet at the BSU, which was the big event for the fall. And she agreed to do that. And that's when I found out that she was actually not planning to come back in the spring because she had a boyfriend at home who was going to South Alabama, and she being from Mobile, decided she would stay there. Mm-hmm. But we had that one date, and then that was on a Saturday night, and then I saw her at church on Sunday. I couldn't remember her being there before, but she came to church on Sunday, and then Sunday night, I think I'd mentioned her. I usually studied at the library on Sunday night, and she showed up there that night to study.
Yeah.
So,
God directing her path, I'm sure.
And she elected to come back to Tuscaloosa for the spring.
I was going to say, we know how the story ends.
Yes,
she eventually breaks up with that boyfriend, right? And so y'all get married.
In 1967.
And kind of take us from 1967 on as y'all's family begins to grow.
Well, it's in '67 we got married, and I had actually, because I'd stayed at summer school, I finished my bachelor's degree in '67, and she was a year away from her degree, and neither of us had a job, so we volunteered to do summer missions work, and were sent to Utah, Salt Lake City, and worked in Utah and Idaho for 10 weeks. I think we each made $30 a week each, but they did provide housing for us. So, and we had a good summer there, and I'd never obviously had any kind of experience like that, being from the deep South like I had been. I had been to St. Louis, Missouri when I was, I think, 7 years old, because my dad went to the Southern Baptist Convention and took us there. And I still remember all of those SBC meetings that he made us go to during that time. Keel Auditorium in St. Louis, I still remember that.
Well, talk to us about maybe what led you to Shades Crest. So y'all get married, family grows, etc. What brings you to Shades Crest?
I had to get into the Navy Reserve. I had a 3-year grant for graduate school. So I had to get in the Navy Reserve to keep from getting drafted and losing the last 2 years of my grant that I had. And so in 1970, when I finished all my coursework, it seemed like a good time to do my active duty, and they were also insisting that I do that. The government was. So they sent us to Morocco. That's where I was I got my orders, and I finished first in my Class A school that they had sent me to, and supposedly the first and second guys got the choice of one of their 3 duties. I was the only guy in my class who didn't get one of my 3 choices. They sent us to Morocco instead, and of course that has had profound influence on our life since then.
Talk to it.
And then when I finished graduate school, my first job was at Samford, and we lived in Alabaster for a year and decided that country suburban living wasn't for us. And so we moved in and moved on Fancher Drive, bought a house on Fancher Drive, which is at the end of Alford Avenue, and moved in next door to Earl and Emma Davis, who were members here. And when my two brothers were helping me unload the truck when we moved in, Emma yelled to me from the window at her house and invited us to Shades Crest, as a matter of fact. And my dad also had known Jim in Coffee County, and he remembered that this was the church that he was at, and he also suggested that I visit here soon. Yeah.
So multiple connections there. Your
Yeah.
father,
Yeah.
the Davises.
Yeah. And
Talk
that
to us a little bit about, you've been here at Shades Crest for many years, but you've also been, with those years, you've also had a lot of memories along with that. Is there a memory? I know there's many, but is there one that maybe sticks out in particular as you've had opportunity to reflect upon that here at Shades Crest?
Well, I told Denise that I had looked at a couple of the other that are out there of the other folks who had talked here, and Fred's, of course, was this last week, I guess it was, wasn't it? But Denise mentioned the fact that our first the Sunday that we moved our membership here, we came to church that Sunday night, and training union was after the worship service. And she remembered Fred and Rita inviting us to go with them to their class that night, which we did. And, of course, we were happy when they came back from Wisconsin. I don't know that Fred was as bad as we are. I think Strother Martin is that actor's name in Cool Hand Luke's. Talks about the people who got rabbit in their blood. Well, Denise and I seem to have had some of that affliction because we've been in and out a few times, but always came back here.
Always bouncing back here, even as the Lord would send you out to Morocco, would send you out to other posts to be able to serve and to teach and things like that, bringing you back here and always having that space of family. Can you talk to me a little bit about Shades Crest being family? Maybe there's an instance you've
Well,
seen.
in particular, when we went to Morocco in '86, we went with the intention of staying there, actually, with the Foreign Mission Board. But as most of you know, Denise developed chronic back trouble, came home in February of '88 and had surgery, and then didn't get a good result. And the kids and I were in Morocco during that time without her, and she was here without us. And she was staying with folks here in the church. I think with the Joneses and with Marshall and Cheryl Morgan provided housing for her. And then in April, we were able to come home for a month, the kids and I, and she had another surgery right after, and we went back without her again. And she had another surgery in May, and we actually got back together in the end of June in France. The kids and I had gone there, and we were in France for some language study for that summer, thinking that she was going to be able to stay here. During that time also, when we came back then in '89, when at the end of '88, when she was not able to stay there, she didn't get much better. She came back here and then had another surgery, which was done in Dothan. There was a surgeon there that the Foreign Mission Board had done some work for them, and he was highly recommended. And so my parents being nearby, we stayed in with my parents. I stayed with my parents. The kids stayed here with, again, R.G. and Lynn. Evans kept Leanna, and Jamie stayed with Mac and Trudy Jones. So that really was like home to them for that time there.
So even through her recovery, through her surgeries, the kids being taken care of, you being taken care of, certainly her being taken
Denise,
care of.
when she had that surgery in May, then she was sort of needing someone to help her recover too, and she stayed with the Morgans and with others there then. Yeah.
And the church family being family, but also serving, and that's kind of what we're talking about today is, service and being a deacon. Talk to us a little bit about what it's meant to be a deacon here at Shades Crest.
Well, I'm glad that Jim can be here tonight because I want him to hear me say that I sort of learned what a deacon was all about. First of all, from his theology and his preaching, but then also on Wednesday nights, because Sue and Denise had choir practice after Wednesday night service, and Jim would always ask me, would you like to go? And at that time, of course, people stayed in the hospital 3 or 4 days if they went in to the hospital. So there was always somebody in the hospital on Wednesday night, and I sort of became accustomed to going with him and accompanying him down there. But in that process, I learned a lot about how to do that and became a lot more, confident about being able to go into somebody's hospital room and visit with them, yeah.
And serving, and you've done that for decades here at Shades Crest Baptist Church.
Right.
But as you begin to think about during this time, it's the time when we're putting forth our ballots for our deacons to serve this upcoming deacon year. What word of encouragement would you give us as a church family as we're prayerfully considering who to put forth on those ballots?
I think those folks with whom you are familiar and who you sense have that desire to be of service to others, and you have seen them demonstrate that, I think you should certainly suggest that they let you nominate them for one of those positions. I remember when we first started having women deacons, Denise was telling me this story that she had sent back in the form and said she would like to talk to one of the active deacons about whether or not she should think seriously about accepting that. And Mac Jones took that request upon himself and went and talked to Denise here at church. And she said, I just don't know if I could walk into a man's hospital room. He said, well, if I was in the hospital, I'd a lot rather see you come in than some old man. So
and that's what helped,
again,
I guess.
She said, well, maybe so. And so she has served a few terms here as well.
But that word of putting forth those we already see recognizing
it's already
and
doing
serving
that, yeah,
is a good word.
And I'm particularly gladdened to see these younger people within our congregation now who are accepting that role as deacon.
Last question here. What word would you give to us of how we can encourage our diaconate? Our diaconate pours out. They serve in a multiplicity of ways in a lot of different ministries, really across the whole church. But what word would you give us as a church family that we could give how we can encourage our diaconate?
Well, just recognize who those folks are when you see them, even in the role that they play, even in the taking up the offering, even, or any other kind of role they play, serving the Lord's Supper and that sort of thing, and give them a word of encouragement and a word of thank you for recognizing that it is something that you have elected to do, and elected to do it because you feel that you've been called to be a servant of Christ.
And we do want to say thank you, particularly to you. Church, would you say thank you to Fred Kelly and service?